I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast, your home for deer hunting news, stories, and strategies. And now, your host, Mark Kenyon.
Welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast. I'm your host, Mark Kenyon, and this is episode number 329. And today in the show, I'm joined by renowned conservation writer Hal Herring to discuss public land history and advocacy, wilderness, and an in-depth look at my book, That Wild Country. All right, welcome to the Wired to Hunt podcast brought to you by Onyx, and welcome to the new year too. Happy New Year to all of you, my friends. Today we've got a special episode in which I am not the host. I am actually the guest. Now, how's that going to work? Well, I was recently interviewed on the Backcountry Hunters Anglers podcast, also known as the BHA Podcast and Blast, which is hosted by esteemed conservation writer, hunter, and angler Hal Herring. He hosts their podcast, and you might also know him as a longtime writer for Field and Stream. He just does great work, and he was kind enough to read my book, That Wild Country, recently, and invite me on their podcast to discuss it. Now, I know you've all heard me talk about my book on the podcast over the past couple weeks or months. I've asked you to buy it. I've given you the Cliff Notes version of what it's all about, but at least on this podcast, we haven't really gone in depth into it. We haven't had any kind of real discussion about the book. I just kind of told you, hey, I wrote this book. It's called That Wild Country. It's about the history of public lands and my own journeys, blah, blah, blah. But we really haven't had any deep discussion on the themes of the book, or the lessons I learned about public lands along the way, or the process of writing it, or any of the details about this whole topic of public land history and politics and advocacy, or any of my adventures or hunts or trips or anything that went on as part of this book. We haven't gone into any of that yet. And I think, maybe I'm biased here, but I think that's some really interesting stuff. And fortunately, Hal wanted to discuss all of that and more on the BHA podcast. And I just think it was such a good conversation that we needed to share it here on Wired to Hunt as well. So that's what you're about to hear. You're about to hear an excerpt from the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers podcast with Hal as host and me as guest. And this is obviously going to be a little bit different, but I think you're really going to enjoy it. If you've read the book already, I think this is going to give you a really interesting new behind-the-scenes look at how the book came together and what I was trying to achieve with it, and maybe give you a more in-depth understanding of what it all meant. And then if you haven't read the book yet, my hope is that this conversation is going to help you better decide if it's something you want to check out at all. So I do think if you love to hunt or fish or hike or camp or recreate on public lands of any kind, this is going to be a podcast for you. And if that also describes you at all, you should also strongly consider joining Backcountry Hunters and Anglers. They are one of the absolute most influential they're great at conversations, but they're also an influential conservation organization. One of the most influential out there in the country today, fighting on behalf of public lands and waters and our rights to hunt and fish and explore these places. So I hope you'll join me in the fight to protect these places. And I think by tapping into BHA, it's a great place and a great way to start. So with all that said, let's take a quick break. And then we will hop over to my interview on the BHA podcast and Blast with Hal Herring. Enjoy.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back, or welcome here if you'd ever been here before. Thanks for coming. This is Backcountry Hunters and Anglers podcast and blast. I'm Hal Herring, and I am in Bozeman, Montana today. I caught up with Mark Kenyon, who has a podcast of Wired to Hunt, and has just written a remarkable book that I've had in my hands for a month or so. I reread it. I read it once fast and reread it once slow for this interview, and I'm super pleased to be able to turn people on to it, because we'll talk about how powerful I think it is. But Mark, first, thanks for doing this, for one thing.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for being here, but thanks for writing that book. It's called That Wild Country. Will you identify yourself just a little bit?
Yeah. So Mark Kenyon here. Like you said, I wrote That Wild Country, but previous to that, I've ran a website and a podcast called Wired to Hunt, which as of 2018, I think, is also part of Meat Eaters Network now, too.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, I've been writing first for digital stuff, then for most of the hunting magazines, and then for Meat Eater myself, and launched the podcast then in 2014, and was doing all of that full time for a few years until got to this point, writing the book. So I'm a hunter, angler, love to do just about anything outside. And
you're a Michigander by birth, right?
Yes, Michigander by birth. Visitor of the West by passion as often as possible.
For sure. Yeah. And in the book, it's like a grand tour of the West too, and which we'll talk about, like the how that works in the book. Yeah. But it is like a grand tour, and it's one. And you know what? It's an everyman's tour too. There's nothing in this book that you do that anybody in the United States can't saddle up an old Ford and go do.
Absolutely.
Which is really, really cool. But you came at this, you were a whitetail hunter first, right?
Yep, that was what we kind of grew up on. We hunted a little 40-acre piece that my grandpa bought in 1985, which was surrounded on two sides by public land. So I grew up going to our deer camp up north and then trudging across the public, looking for big woods bucks.
Yeah.
And
is that Upper Peninsula or Northern Michigan or
northern lower?
Gotcha.
Yep. And
below the bridge.
Yes, below the bridge. So I'm a troll.
You're a troll,
according to the Upers.
when Jim Harrison stuff started coming out a lot, my friends and I are in Alabama, and I'd never been to Michigan. The first place I ever went to Michigan was Kalamazoo as a grown man.
Yep.
But my friends go, "You know what they call those people?" And I said, "What's that?" Trolls.
Yeah.
Because they live below the bridge.
That's
super cool.
It is pretty fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, Michigander, and grew up hunting deer and fishing for perch and walleye and pike and bass and all that.
Yeah.
Trolling around the lakes of the western side of the state, and did a little bit of hiking, camping, exploring along the way too.
Yeah. And did you start out when you were young doing all this?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was in the blind with my dad at age 3 or 4.
Right.
It was an interesting thing. We were very, my family was really into hunting and fishing from the cultural side. Like, we identified as hunters and anglers. Like, that was our thing. When we get together for family get-togethers, we're all sitting there talking about hunting and fishing.
Yep.
But we never, the family before, we never took it so far as to really go deep into strategy or really go so far as start going out west or anything. So we forever, the family loved to hunt, loved to fish, but it was always, you did what you always did.
Yep.
You went and sat next to a tree.
Yep.
Or, walked out and you found a rub and you sat down, that's what you did. So that was the extent of my hunting education until I kind of went off on my own and then had to self-educate to take things to the next level. But it developed this really foundational passion. Was really the biggest thing I got from my family.
Well, that's a really, to me, that actually the South is somewhat like that too, but that's a Midwestern thing where it's everybody. Some of the best fishermen and hunters I know have come out of the Midwest.
Yeah,
and it's they've been there. They've been unquestioned in this pursuit like since babyhood.
Yeah.
And that's not to say that all of them don't take it to that other level too. They do. You run into them all over the place.
Yep.
But, that's pretty interesting. And I can relate to that from growing up where people just went to the deer stand.
It was very much just steeped in tradition.
Yeah.
It was the cabin.
Yeah.
Go to deer camp. And just no power, no water, just go out there, propane lanterns, and just getting away from it all. It was almost just about going to this. It was a pilgrimage to this place where your friends and family came back together every year, and so much that revolves around that. But I remember at age 6 and 7 and 9 and 10, the thing I would always want to do is I'd go and stand out underneath the buck pole. You'd hang the deer that are shot hung on the buck pole, and I would just stand there staring at them, thinking, "Wow, what an animal! What if someday I want to head off into the woods on my own and be able to do that?"
Yeah.
And
so y'all had some success there.
Yeah, I mean, we had success, relatively limited, in decline over the years. Actually, just deer populations plummeting in the 2000s in that part of the state, but enough success to keep me interested as a kid.
Right, sure.
To really just fill my imagination.
Yeah, it's incredible to marvel at that. And I'm old enough to remember when they first came back to North Alabama. And they were just our idea of everything that ought to be out there in the woods.
I bet, yeah.
You know what I mean? They're like they made the woods. I remember my civics teacher, who's helped me a lot in hunting and stuff. He said, it just blows my mind that there's these big woods left, and there's these big old animals out there in it, just living their own lives.
Well, how lonely or tragic would it be to have a place like that without those big animals anymore?
Yeah.
It wouldn't feel right.
Right, you bet. Well, I was thinking about Peter Mathias, and I think when he wrote Wildlife in America, he talked about that great American silence, and then and how it it wasn't silent on the Great Plains.
Right.
During, pre-Columbus.
It was an uproar.
It was an uproar, yeah.
And I'm sure so many people have said this over the previous 150 years, but I can't help but just wonder and imagine and dream about what that must have been like.
Yeah. I go back to the journals of Lewis and Clark every once in a while just to think about that. And I go to Great Falls, Montana a lot. That's like our supply town. And I'll go down, and it's all dammed up, the falls and stuff like that. And someday I hope it'll run free. Maybe they can replace the power with a flow through or something.
Sure.
But we spent a lot of time on the river there, and I think about that all the time. It's like there's areas there where there were so many buffalo that died crossing the ice that the water would be contaminated way downstream.
Yeah. And then wolves and grizzlies by the dozens and dozens just eating all the carrion.
And we were thinking about Pishkin is I think it's Blackfeet for a buffalo jump.
Okay.
And Ulm, Montana, is a little town there on the Missouri, and it has an enormous buffalo jump and an incredible state park there. And I mean, anybody who is coming from Helena to Great Falls on a trip, it would be
check that out.
Well advised to stop. And that place, we were imagining when this was pre-bow, mostly pre-horse. And when that was rocking, when they're running those buffalo over that, and the little kids are hiding they have these hides they pick up to startle the buffalo.
Yep.
And when that was rocking, we were thinking like every grizzly, every eagle, every wolf. I mean, imagine
the scene.
What the scene was, and then all the people, because they just moved there until they had it all processed.
Right.
Yeah.
Unimaginable.
Yeah. Carrying obsidian knives that are made from stuff that's it's quarried down to Yellowstone.
Yeah.
Carried it. Yeah. I mean,
so interesting. I just read an interesting book examining, the Clovis and Folsom cultures and kind of everything that was going on during the Pleistocene era.
Cool.
And just talking about how so many of the tools were imported in from very specific places. They would make pilgrimages to a different place, like to Knife Lake in northern Minnesota to get a certain type of stone, and to this location, then you see them coalesce in certain regions where then all the people came to for these
and then
events.
trade. Yeah.
Just really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a quarry at Montana City near Helena.
Okay.
That is, it's as old as anybody can date back. Everybody's changing those dates now. There's 10,000 years ago, and then they're going, wow, this is 12. But
fascinating stuff.
It's incredible stuff, and if anybody's never seen the Clovis stuff, they're huge.
Yeah, I've never seen them in person. I'd like to.
There's some in the museum in Helena. And they're big. They're for chopping like mammoths and giant sloths.
Different kind of game.
Yeah, and the only art that survives is this. They took these multicolored stones and they chipped them. They had somebody who was an insane artisan, and they had these multicolored bands in the stone, and we don't know what their art was, but clearly this was their art because they put it in the burial site on it's called the Anzac site up by Wilsall, Montana.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's these 2 children buried in that, and they're covered with red ochre, and they have the best of the best choppers and scrapers.
So you wonder what their status was or what awarded them that kind of burial.
Something, yeah.
Huh.
Somebody found them looking for hunting gravel with a front end loader.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wilsall.
Yeah.
It's a nice little area over there.
It's pretty country. Apparently, it's always been pretty nice.
I guess so, yeah. Imagine. Beautiful valley.
Yeah. So, as a Michigander, you started coming west. Obviously, in this book, you started like 12. You came west as a kid, right? Child.
We did 2 trips west as a child. When I was, I don't remember, it was like 6 or 7 or 7 or 8, and then one more like 2 years later. One trip we did the Northwest. We hit Mount Rainier National Park, North Cascades, and Olympic, and then the second was to Glacier. And those just became foundational in my childhood imagination. Uh-huh. We never went back. I wish we had, but I think family just got busy and all that kind of stuff.
It's hard to do.
Yeah.
You've got a toddler, right?
Yes, I've got a toddler now. So it's not easy. But that had this, I don't know, it just lingered in me forever. So ever since that, I always dreamed of going back, of wanting to get into this big wild country, doing something above and beyond what I did growing up, which was fun, but relatively domestic hunting and fishing, kind of adventure, go out to the lake with the boat, that kind of thing.
And everything you grow up with seems domestic to you by the time you're 18.
Yes. So, it wasn't until I actually, kind of went off on my own and finished off the craziness of college that I started making my own pilgrimages out west. And did the first one, did a 3-week trip when I was heading out towards my full-time job in California that I took out of college, and we took 3 weeks to go and experience these things. And that's when I realized, wow, this is, I mean, as anyone who has done that same trip or experienced that same thing comes to understand, this is something really special. And ever since then, I've been trying to spend more and more time of my year exploring public lands out west. And I've gotten to, I'm very lucky with my career that I get to spend a significant amount of time for a Midwesterner, at least.
Yeah. And what did you study in college?
Marketing, business. And took a job working for a tech company doing online advertising and marketing. That's where it started for me. And
that's a great part of the book too. It's your personal journey, like where you said like that was great, but you wanted something different at some point. And you took a big risk.
Yeah. So coming out of college, I had a little bit of, and you tell me if this is not what you want to talk about, because I could get rambling if I'm not careful, but I'll try to make it as short as I possibly can. I thought I wanted to get into business and be this big businessman, took an internship in New York City, realized that's not what I want. I couldn't hunt, I couldn't fish, couldn't get outside to do the things I wanted to do. So I said, okay, I've got to find a way to link my passion for the outdoors with what I do. But then my last year of college, I got wooed by everything that is Google. This company came in, and I was seduced by the allure of working for a company like that, which ended up being great. But so I took that job and ignored what I'd learned the previous summer. But immediately upon getting out to California,
you ignored what you learned in New York City?
Exactly.
I got you.
Exactly. Yeah. So I told myself I'm going to work somehow related to the outdoors or Google, because Google just couldn't say no to that. And so I got that job. And immediately, though, that fall, I'm working in Mountain View, California at the headquarters there. And right away, I felt that claustrophobia again. I felt that just lack of oxygen. Uh-huh. And so it was, I don't remember, October probably of 2009. And I read a book. I went to Barnes & Noble and was looking for books. And I found this book. It was called Crush It. And it was all about combining your passion with your vocation someday. And I
actually remember that book.
Yeah. I closed the book and I said, that's what I'm doing. And I started right then working on this thing that became Wired to Hunt. And I said, I'm not going to stop working on this until I'm able to do this for a living and for my life. Wow. And that led me to where I am now.
And this is probably not as extraneous to, but did you know about podcasting then that early?
I was aware of podcasting, but and I actually listened to a couple podcasts back then. I remember Peterson's Bow Hunting had a podcast at that point that early. And then there was another one called Bowcast, I think. So I was listening to those back then. But I didn't I didn't realize that I should create my own for several years. But actually, it was the tools or the resources that helped me the most to build my own company and my own brand and allow me to take that stepping stone or that jump off the cliff. It was podcasts. I was listening to all these entrepreneurial podcasts and things, and that kind of gave me the skill set and just the confidence that, oh, wow, people are doing this. This is a thing you can do.
Yeah.
And then, so I quit Google in the fall of 2013 and went for it.
Wow. And you went back to Michigan?
Yeah. And so I was only in California for 4 or 5 months at headquarters. And then we had an office in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And so that's where I worked for the remaining 3.5 years.
Gotcha.
And great experience.
Are you a self-taught writer?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah. And
just read a lot.
That's what I tell everybody too when people ask me. Because then you can look at a paragraph of yours and say, yeah, okay, or this clearly doesn't stand up.
Yes,
because I just read Rick Bass, or who you referred to in your book, but and that's setting the bar too high, right?
Yeah.
But that's how I feel like most people can write. You just have to read.
I'm a voracious, insatiable reader. I love books. So I read. And once I started writing for my website, I realized that I wanted to become as good of a writer as I possibly could because I found a tremendous amount of satisfaction in sharing and writing. So then started reading books about writing and reading with a writer's eye. And so when I read something, I'm thinking to myself, why is this so compelling? Right. Why does this move me from page to page to page? How did I learn something here and not even realize it?
Right.
Or what don't I like about this book?
Right.
And so that's how I learned to write. And hopefully, like you said, I have this tremendous sense of like that imposter syndrome. So as I'm writing the book, I'm like, there's no way this could be as good as Steve's book or Rick's book or such and such's book. But you just try your very best to just get something on the page, and then you pound your head against the wall over and over again, trying to rewrite and fix and fine tune, and then eventually you have to say, I did the best I possibly could in this moment as I am right now, and you just have to put it out there into the world, and that's what we did. Yeah. And
there's an athletic analogy there too, is leaving it all on the field. You know, and I think a reader can, there's a supernatural element in here, and it's like my friend he's a diamond miner. Someday I hope to get him on a podcast, but people say he has supernatural abilities to find stuff, but the truth is, he says, I don't. I just look for stuff 1,000 times more than anybody else does. Yeah. And so you end up, and then you start finding that you can do these things.
Yep.
Or Malcolm Gladwell talks about the 3,000-hour rule or the 10,000 repetition rule. That's true in jiu-jitsu, right?
Yep. Anything.
And in anything, right? Guitar playing. But you have to have an incredible passion for it in order to do it 10,000 times.
Very rarely is it this just like gift from heaven that flows down through your fingers easily. It seems like we have that assumption when you think of great artists or writers or whatever pursuit it might be, we assume they must have something that we don't.
Right.
But they probably don't. It's just, like you said, having the passion and the willingness to work for a long time.
Sure. And, or you could be like me and be utterly unemployable. As a tree planter and a timber thinner, and a trail builder, eventually you got to find something else.
You made something work.
Yeah.
You figured it out.
But I can tell you, so when you're saying this book can't be as good as Rick Bass or whatever, the book is extraordinary. And
Thank you so much.
And I would take a different tack if I didn't really think that. It is just you did it, and it's a as we were talking about a little bit before we started. One of the things you managed to do is something that we need right now more than we've ever needed it before, which is to understand how we got the incredible things we have.
Yeah, and
you have managed to teach. In this book, and the word would be to be didactic, right? But as Jim Harrison wrote, he goes, but you better hide it. He goes, everybody wants to teach, right? Because you feel like you got something to relate, but you better give people a story,
what they want,
and an adventure, and not be putting on a little professor hat and banging on hitting them with a stick, you know? And one of the things you did in here is you have in it, and it looks effortless, which it always does when you do it right. But you have given us this history that we cannot do without. I promise.
That is the greatest compliment that could ever ask
Well,
for.
that's what we're looking down. I mean, this is what I was hunting, and I was reading it, and I was like, you have the history. You even go far afield from just public lands and do, like, how did we restore the wildlife? You've got Pittman Robertson, you've got Dingle Johnson in here, and they're all inside a narrative of you out in the field going to one incredible place after another.
Yeah. What kind of inspired me to do this was that, as I alluded to earlier, I started heading out west. I started exploring public lands. I started hunting for elk and going to this place or that place. And then in 2014 and 15, then the land transfer movement starts picking up steam. And I'm starting to see, okay, these places that I've developed this tremendous love for and that I'm going out and spending every ounce of vacation time I have to see. And every time I leave Michigan, I want to dive into these places. Now I'm realizing they're threatened, and I'm trying to understand that. Yeah. And during that whole period of time, I had this realization, I don't understand how we got here. I'm hearing these words like Sagebrush Rebellion, or I'm hearing about this person or that person. Right. I don't understand the context of the now. Right. And if I don't know that, and I worked in the hunting world, the outdoor world, if I don't know that, a lot of other people probably don't too. And then I started asking friends and family around me in the Midwest and elsewhere, and I realized they don't even know we have these places, let alone how we got there. Right. So I realized there's this huge information gap. So I started trying to learn myself. And then once I did that, I realized, there is information out there. Yep. But it's in these dusty old textbooks. There's these dense history books that the average person will never read. Right. So I thought, well, I'm not a professional conservationist. I'm not a historian. I'm none of these things. I don't live out west. I haven't been involved in these things for decades. Who am I to try to write a book about this? But I came to terms with the fact that I am the target market that needs this. Gotcha. I am the person, like, there are so many other people just like me in Michigan or New York or Florida or Georgia or Wyoming or Montana, right, sure, who don't know the context, who don't know how we got here, who maybe are unaware of even this amazing heritage that we have. So if I could write something from that perspective, for those people, that could do some good maybe. Yeah. And do it in a way, like you said, that doesn't feel stodgy and slow and dense. No, it's in an adventure, you know. And when I studied writing, Kim Barnes, who wrote a great book called In the Wilderness, she told me you got to give people 80% scene if you want to give them 20% exposition. Yeah. She said somebody wants to take a trip with you. Yes. They don't want to be lectured to. Yeah. But and she said that formula, actually, you got it. It's in this book, by the way, which you did unknowingly probably, but that's the way you tell a story, right? I've never found that to fail. You can push it. She said it was like putting money in the bank with like story and adventure and scene, and then taking money out of the bank when you're trying to teach somebody something or give them some facts. Exactly. And you nailed that in this.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid, and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something, because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil, made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land? Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild. But searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today. Because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
Book. One of the things I also, when you're saying you were the target market, you're the target audience, you yourself.
Yeah.
And so that the book also works as an exploration where you are going to learn these things as a person who loves something but doesn't know enough about it.
Exactly.
But I'd also say that and I think this is where we are in Bozeman right now, like where we are with people all over the United States, where we are with BHA too.
Yep.
And I've just come around to this reluctantly lately. We are the man in the arena that Roosevelt talked about. And we definitely include all our sisters in that too, the man or the woman in the arena.
Absolutely.
And because we love something so much, the onus is upon us to reach a hand out to somebody and say, hey man, let me tell you a story.
Yeah. That's 100% true. And that's, I've told this story a few times or explained this, but basically I've had this career trajectory too, where I went from, could I do this thing? Could I write about hunting and someday be able to make a little bit of money from it? And then eventually I was able to do that. And then it was this dream of maybe I could someday do that as my career. And I was able to do that. And then it was maybe I could be able to pay for my mortgage and pay for Spotify.
Right, sure. Right. And have a truck that starts.
Exactly.
Right.
So maybe I could do that. And then eventually it got to a point though where I realized, okay, what are my next goals? Where am I going with this? What do I want to be when I grow up?
Yeah.
And I had this shift from just being able to like make it or to make some money or whatever to be able to love what I do to how do I make a positive difference? Like how do I do something that matters?
Right.
And it was right around that same time that this whole situation was brewing in the country and then in myself, and I thought this is that something you could do that maybe could matter.
Yeah. And as you describe in the book, you're on a trip when the Bundy occupation of Malheur comes up.
Yes.
And there's some incredible journalists covering that. Amanda Peacher at OPB, Oregon Public Broadcasting.
Yeah.
I mean, I was just glued to that for a while, you know, and they were very well informed, unlike many of the journalists who showed up there and listened to whatever they said and took it at face value.
Right.
But you were actually put onto this, and I go back. I found Terry Anderson's report called "How and Why to Privatize All Federal Lands Now" in 1999.
Wow.
And 1999 was kind of a watershed moment for me because I had been in the West for 10 years. 11 years.
Okay.
And I was just hunting the Missouri breaks. I was just learning like the epic vastness of BLM lands out, you know, clear to eastern Montana, clear over to eastern Oregon. And I was really reveling in this stuff. And my kids were being born right at the same time.
Yeah.
You and I had that moment.
Yeah.
And it was like, holy smokes.
You realize, wow, this stuff isn't guaranteed, or this stuff isn't.
And we should have known that in a world of 7 billion people, that people aren't going to give free, let you run around free on your own land, you know.
It's very easy to take it for granted, though.
They still do.
Right.
I mean, I have people that talk to me about saying, and I swear, I would swear that they don't know what the federal government does, but they despise the federal government so much that they would give away their own land in an act of like, what, anger? Like taking a chainsaw, it's not cutting off your nose to spite your face, it's like cutting off your head with a saw.
I can't.
And you go, I showed them.
I can't explain that, but
you can't.
It is very present out there, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But to your point, I mean, there is just so... There's just as today we are many people, and at various times in our lives, maybe we're divorced from the natural world, divorced from where we get our food. Yeah. Right? As hunters, we try to reconnect there. I think the same thing applies to our land.
Yeah.
It's for a lot of folks. For me, growing up, it was just, we cross the ditch and that's public land.
Yeah.
And that's where you and Dad go hunt. And Uncle Steve hunts on the west side of the public land, and you and Dad hunt on the north side, and I never gave it a second thought. Yeah. Never wondered how we got that. Never wondered how Glacier National Park came to be and why I could have this moment where my dad and I walked over the hill and 100 elk ran across the river, and I was mesmerized by it, and I can still see that scene in my mind right now. I never thought about what it took for me to have that transformational moment when I was 10 years old.
Right. When you talk about the Lamar Valley and hearing that and fishing, it's Lamar Creek, right?
Well, Slough Creek.
Slough Creek, yeah. And just being able to see everything on the bottom.
Yeah.
Like like how do you get that, right?
Yeah.
It's
like, really easy to just enjoy that thing for what it is right now, which is good. You should enjoy it.
Which is good, right? That's what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, you want to enjoy the present, but every once in a while, it's worth taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture.
Sure. That's that Ed Abbey who infuses your book too, in a good way. But Ed Abbey said that I don't know the whole quote, but he said, "Be a half-hearted fanatic."
Oh, I love that.
And
quote.
never forget.
I know what you're talking about. He's like, get out there and do this stuff.
And do this stuff. Be a half-hearted fanatic.
Yeah. He definitely has influenced some of my thoughts and writing.
Sure. We were talking about that. I read him in high school. I was lucky, and my father was a fan of that movie "Lonely Are the Brave," which is Kirk Douglas is this ultimate like anarchist cowboy, and it's kind of it's still a good movie, but it's kind of didactic and as like freedom and anarchy and cowboys and all. But it's a good movie, and it's based on Edward Abbey's second novel or first novel, Brave Cowboy.
Okay,
it's worth reading. I mean,
is that the one that starts off with this cowboy that just a guy that kind of walks or rides his horse up to a little town and gets off his horse, walks into a house?
Yep. That's it. Yeah.
I've read the first couple chapters and I haven't finished it.
It's a clunky book.
Is it?
Yeah, but it's good. I mean, it's got a lot of thumbprints as Ed Abbey becomes the desert solitaire writer, and the Fool's Progress was one of my favorite novels.
Yes.
But yeah, it's worth going back and revisiting some of that, especially as a writer, because you can see how much better he got.
Right. Yeah. He's a heck of a writer, and we were just talking earlier how I like these two different approaches to talking about something like public lands or conservation, or within this book even. Part of me really wanted this theme and this idea. And this, I personally think a lot about the fact that we need to find ways to work together, to find compromise, to reach a hand across the aisle or across from Cabela's to REI or whatever it might be, and say, hey, let's look past some of our differences and stand up for these things we have a shared love for. Or sometimes you need to have a moderate way of going about things.
Yep.
And then other times you need to channel your inner Ed Abbey and burn the house down and have some piss and vinegar. And he was always, he was a very controversial figure, a very passionate figure. He didn't have a middle gray area. He was black and white.
Yeah, for sure.
To a fault, probably in some ways.
In some ways, I think we all live in our time, and some of it, of course, sometimes you live in the wrong time and it doesn't catch fire, right? But he caught fire because it was the time for that, and I think maybe that time will come again if it's not here now. I do know it's here in some ways. People need to become passionate and activists. But your book, I was going to say, you could have seen this, you could have written this book as a shot across the bow of the American Lands Council and the American Legislative Exchange, whatever it is, you could have written that as a direct attack, and you did not. The book is less a shot across the bow than a tap on the shoulder and a let's talk here. Let me tell you a story.
Yeah.
And I love that.
Yeah, I hope that's something that resonates with other people too, because I wanted it to be accessible. Yep. I didn't want to turn people off before they could get through it.
Yeah, well, you got to earn their trust before you can give them a polemic.
Yeah. And
you did not do the polemicist role here. You didn't do it.
Yeah.
And Stegner was and so that's where your title came from, right?
Yep.
Let me read that quote.
Such a good one.
We simply need that wild country available to us, even if we never do more than drive to its edge and look in, for it can be a means of reassuring ourselves of our sanity as creatures, a part of the geography of hope. Holy smokes.
Yeah, you can't beat that.
And that's where you took your title, right?
Yeah. I was between the geography of hope or That Wild Country for the title.
Gotcha.
And I think there'd been an essay called The Geography of Hope from that same title. So I decided to try to go this route. But yes, tremendously influenced by the the words of Stegner and
And
Abbey.
and Stegner was a moderate.
Yeah. It's there's a book called The Wild Within. You read that by David Gessner?
Yes.
And
yes, it's Edward Abbey and Stegner.
Yes. So it looks at this. It's so interesting. They represent those two things I just talked about. Those two sides of the coin.
Yep.
The two approaches to this. They
Gotcha.
both loved public land. They both loved the West. They both had a fiery passion for it, but they approached it in very different ways.
Yeah.
And it's how I personally try to approach it too. I want some Ed Abbey in me, and I want some Stegner in me.
Yeah.
And tried to somehow bring that to life within the pages here.
The firebrand and the diplomat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Ed Robertson sent me that book.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a friend of Gessner's.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I just chatted with him a couple weeks
Yeah,
ago.
that was the first I'd heard of that book, and I've been carrying it around, reading at it as I go.
I like it. It's a good book.
Yeah,
it's a good book.
It's perfect for this. What you're talking about.
Yep.
There is a kind of a synchronicity. I think the police kind of ruined that term for me. The band, you know. But there's a kind of synchronicity in all this, you know.
Yep.
So in all this, you start. Let's just talk about how you did this. So you decided to start with the Yellowstone National Park.
Yep.
And you decided to go ahead and take the national parks and the BLM and the Forest Service all together, which is bold.
Yeah. Well, again, it came down to, for me, just early on, I didn't know that there were all these different branches of public land, or all these different ways that it's broken down and managed and used. And so for me, for someone to have a basic foundational understanding of public lands and public land history, we had to at least define that, hey, there are these different things. Because you talk to a friend of mine in Detroit, and they've got no clue what the BLM is.
No.
Or I think when a lot of people think, oh, America's public lands, it's Yellowstone National Park.
Yep.
I'm like, oh, that's it.
Well, so many times I've heard people go, well, they can't do that. They can't log there. That's a national park.
Right.
And I was like, no, that's a national forest. It's been like providing logs for, 100 years.
Yeah.
And they go, no.
Yeah. There's just so many gaps.
And it is confusing.
Yeah. So what I kind of wanted to do is go on a series of trips that both fit naturally with the historical narrative that I wanted to share, but also in a certain way represent the larger picture of what our public lands were. So I tried to visit a varied array of places, different types of regions, different types of public lands. So I had some BLM trips, I had national park trips, I had national forest, I had wilderness area.
Right.
I had wildlife refuge. And so I wanted to use those opportunities to also slip in the vegetables of information naturally as we went along. So as you follow my own adventures through all these different places, doing all sorts of different things too, you naturally learned about the differences. You naturally learned about how these things fit into the progression of our public lands from, the original idea of something like a national park or national forest all the way to a wilderness.
Yeah.
And what that means today.
Yep. And how we got it. I mean, that the chapter where you introduced like the battles over wilderness itself.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, those are some of my favorites because I've been at this a long time, and you brought stuff like the U regulations and all this stuff, and and they're the vegetables, right? But they went down good.
Good, thank goodness.
But that was stuff that I had to go back and look at that. I did not. You've got stuff in here that it's a deep dive with plenty of oxygen.
Yeah.
I got you. I got to tell you, I'm for anybody who wants to inform themselves painlessly of this book is extraordinary.
That's great.
And we needed it. I wanted to get down here and do this podcast in part just to talk to you about the process of this, and it establishes you as an author, but also as a hunter conservationist.
Yeah.
This book is a person who doesn't hunt will read this book no problem.
And that's a great point you brought up. That was one of the foundational things coming into this project that I want to do as well. I talked earlier about wanting to bridge those divides.
Yeah.
I wanted this book not to be just a hunting book.
Right.
I mean, when people would identify me, like I'm probably a hunter first and foremost, other than a father and a husband. I'm a hunter. But I also love all these other things. And I wanted something that would be accessible and interesting to all outdoor users, because I think all outdoor users need to come together for these places.
Right.
And we got to find ways to work hand in hand on some of this. And so I wanted something that, again, wouldn't turn people off, but also hopefully come out of this maybe with a different perception of hunting too.
Sure.
And maybe the reverse as well. Maybe a hunter would read this and maybe feel a little bit different about a backpacker.
Right.
So yeah, I have backpacking trips. I have pack rafting trips. I have hunting trips. I have fishing trips. A little bit of everything in here, because I wanted this to reach an audience of diverse peoples, because I think this message of public lands is really important for all those people.
It is. It is, and we tend to get hung up in the inside baseball of mountain biking or e-bikes or all this stuff, whereas most of the people that we talk to, most people we know, especially for me in the South, they don't care about whether mountain bikes can be on the Missouri Breaks. They don't even know where that is or why. They can go there and enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I tell people about the catfishing on the Missouri, and they're super interested in that. And I'm going, that's the C.M. Russell Wildlife Refuge. And they go, what's that? Is that the feds?
Yeah, right. You got to kind of find, though, these, like you mentioned it earlier with, I can't remember how you phrased it, but you have to create different doorways for people to come into something like this. And so for some people, maybe there's some hunting in there. That's my doorway, and I'm going to read it because I know Mark hunts or whatever. But maybe then the doorway for somebody else might have been, well, I don't know, I see he's a hunter, but hey, he does a bunch of backpacking. I'm into that kind of thing. And then they come into it, or maybe it's something else. But if we can get them in the door and through this journey, hopefully they come out of it with a positive idea about hunting and hunters and anglers, and they learn something, or maybe a hunter. I mean, I don't know. I just would, at least for me, that's the way I would like to go about my work, is with open arms and say, hey, join the family.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm not the person who wants to say, well, you're not just like me, get out of here.
No, and we've talked about this before, but it's like, you don't want everybody to be the same or everybody agreeing or walking in lockstep.
Right.
And you treat people with a lot of respect in this, and I've learned something from reading this book, actually, because I was getting less and less objective about the Utah contingent, and it's continuous assault on every aspect of public lands, and this vaguely couched hatred of really the way our country is now, where everybody has a say. And I was getting less and less objective, and as I read this, I realized that I've been in the West probably too long, right? I've been and your approach here was much more balanced, and the truth is everybody does. They do. We need those voices at the table.
Yeah.
Okay, those voices can't go to the president and demand whatever and get it. I don't want that.
Yeah.
But I never want to be the kind of person who doesn't shake hands and listen.
Yeah. Well, and I say this in the book, one of the things that's most frustrating about public lands, but also what makes them so unbelievably special, is that they are multi-use. It is that there's a lot of different stakeholders with very different ideas about how to manage them, how to use them, and that can be a huge pain in the ass sometimes.
It is a pain in the ass.
They can drive us nuts.
Yep. Great things come with the pain in the ass.
Yes. And so that's this like inherent, and is never going to change, hopefully. Right. In that I hope it never gets pulled way the other direction. Right. But that is going to be that tug of war that's going to continue for the next 50 years or 100 years, hopefully hundreds of years, that we can keep these places around and viable. That's a reality that we could either point a finger at and say, this is horrible, and complain about it, or we can say, this is the reality we live in. How do we work within that box? Right. How do we do this in a way that's positive for the greatest good for the greatest number? And so I've always kind of approached things from like the rational standpoint there. But it's also really easy to have the emotional, visceral feeling of frustration and concern. And I also believe that, there's the Leopold quote that the downside of ecological education is that you live in a world of wounds. That's right. And I think the same thing exists for someone who pays attention to public land issues. Is the more you pay attention to this stuff, the more you see this being cut away at and this being attacked and these little things that fly underneath the radar.
Well, you talk about what Randy Newberg calls it, you didn't use this phrase, but defund and decry.
Right.
We're cutting the budgets for the BLM, and now we're going to tell everybody that, holy smokes, these people don't do nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
Why don't we just do something else with the land?
Exactly.
And that I think that's a really good part in this book, too, because that's something that, unless you're really paying attention, you don't get that part.
Yeah,
Forest Service,
death by
BLM,
1,000 cuts.
death by 1,000 cuts until finally, and you managed to get this in there too, or we industrialize the landscape so completely that nobody wants it.
What's the point of protecting it? Because it's a piece of junk.
Yeah, we've already ruined it. Sorry.
Yeah. So that's the tricky thing is you have to, it could become, if you pay attention, you want to pay attention. We want people to be engaged in this. There's also, though, and I imagine you've experienced this because you've been in it longer than I have, but there's probably a tendency to either get so upset with things that you either become bitter or you become apathetic, where you say, throw your hands up and say, what can I do? And I think, at least what I learned from this, from learning and dissecting the stories of so many people who were part of this history, was that regardless of how oftentimes we might feel that we're not in control or that we can't influence things, the people that did were the ones who said, damn it, I'm still going to put my foot down. I'm still going to do the little thing I can do. And those things add up. And we've seen a few things recently that I think are encouraging, that show, hey, we still have a voice. We still can make a difference. And then you can look back 50 years ago and see how people had a voice then and influenced real change. And, we're benefiting from it now. So
we are the beneficiaries of some insanely difficult decisions and hard work.
Yeah.
And Roosevelt, and you really bring in Franklin Roosevelt in here too. Ed Robertson mentioned to me, he said, I about your book, I had no idea how much Franklin Roosevelt did on public lands issues following the Dust Bowl. And so much of that can make me very angry, I'll tell you, because there was a lot of land saying that I know really well in eastern Montana who were basically homesteaded, destroyed, not out of malice, just people trying to make it in a place that they couldn't, and then abandoned. Those lands then were taken back by the federal government under the Bankhead-Jones Act and restored. So much of it was restored, and now we have people saying, well, we want those. And I'm looking at him, I'm like going, dude, you got to go back to the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, and you got to come up with that $6 million in gold or whatever it was we paid after the Mexican War, and then you're going to have to fight. But you're going to have to, you can't have the American people's legacy.
There's so much in there, and it's so easy to never be able to wrap your head around.
Right, it is. It's super hard.
So it was tricky to try to figure out a way. How do you distill a Titanic ship full of information into a few anecdotes and a handful of key points?
You're right.
But FDR was one of those characters who I had no idea previously what an influence he had. And what I liked about how he handled things, at least in regards to some of these public land decisions, was that he, from what I understood and from what I've read and seen, is that he never tried to position himself as the arbiter of what was right or as being the expert on how these things should be handled. He seemed to take a much more, what's the word I'm looking for here? A delegatory approach. In that he would reach out to the experts. So he brought in Gifford Pinchot. Guide me, Gifford. He brought in Bob Marshall and said, hey, tell me what you're seeing on the ground. Where do we need to go with this? He listened to the Leopolds and the Marshalls, and I think that led to some decisions being made that really helped us out in the long run.
Right.
But also, I mean, right there, you look at the debates between FDR and a Marshall about wilderness, right? President Franklin Roosevelt was much more in favor of more development, more roads, more of that. And he had, good reasons for some of that.
Do you have an interesting part in here? It's the road through the Smokies or through the Blue Ridge?
Yeah, through the Smokies. They were going to run a road right through a ridge through what's now the National Park.
So that more people could enjoy it.
Right. And from one approach, that could make sense.
Sure.
But then...
I still hear that about the Bob Marshall, by the way.
Right. Oh, jeez. I can't remember where I read it. I think maybe it was in this book I just finished called The Only Kayak. But the guy said when you're talking about this topic, at some point, more access becomes excess. And there's a really fine line. Access is important, but it can very quickly become excess.
Yeah.
And that was this debate raging in the 30s and 40s when the CCC was building new campgrounds and roads and fire towers, all these different things, which were viewed as progress and great by a lot of people. But then you had other folks saying, whoa, whoa, whoa.
Right.
Rein it back, guys.
Yeah.
We're destroying the thing we were trying to protect.
Yeah.
And we, of course, are still having those same debates today.
And some of that architecture and stuff they did is so spectacular.
Yeah, still around now.
Yeah, and I think about Gates Park in the Bob, and that's this incredible cabin situation. It's beautiful, like infrastructure. It's way up. If you go up where y'all went up the North Fork, you jump the hump over into this big park system. It's freezing cold in there. People tried to homestead that actually at one point.
It's an amazing place.
Yeah,
I'm very jealous of all the time.
I love that part of your book too, the pack rafting part.
Really cool trip, pack rafting and fly fishing in the Bob.
Yeah.
Wow, that is a special place.
And it's there's a lot here. I was going to get you to read the very last page, but I'm not going to do that because that can be for the people who get the book, right? We're not doing any spoilers on it, but your conclusions in Alaska, there's some powerful stuff there that people can leave. They can put this book down and take away energized.
Good.
And I was interested too, beyond that. I like the fact that it ends in that massive landscape. The caribou. It does,
it seems fitting.
Yeah.
And it's funny, we were talking earlier about how so many times we think that writers or artists or whatever have this like divine intervention and it flows through them and it's so easy. Right. So it wasn't like that at all for me for this book. It was hard. It was just a lot of days sitting at the blinking cursor like, oh my gosh, how am I going to do this?
Yeah.
But I had one moment of that flow. It was 2 a.m. and I wrote the final chapter in a flurry of like, I don't know, 2 hours nonstop, wrote that last chapter.
Yeah.
It's my favorite chapter. It's my favorite thing I've ever written.
Yeah.
It just kind of poured out of me. It was like an emotional outpouring. So I'm very proud of that. And I'm glad that you liked that.
I never heard that quote. I'm almost going to look it up. It's Peter, somebody who it's a quote on hunting of intersecting the line.
Oh yes, the great moment that only hunters know. Where I'll let you read it, but
I'm gonna have to find it. Be patient with me.
While you're looking for that, it is in a terrific collection of essays called "A Hunter's Heart," which is edited by David Peterson.
Gotcha. Yeah, I know David Peterson.
Mm-hmm. And so that for anyone looking for another book, highly recommend that one. And within that, there's an essay where he talks about, I think it was an elk hunt, and he had this wonderful description of that moment right before the shot. And
you want to read it?
Yeah, sure.
It's really hot.
All right, let me find where it is here on the page. Here it is. Pete Dunn, in A Hunter's Heart, describes these final seconds as the great moment that only hunters know, when all existence draws down to 2 points in a single line, and the universe holds its breath, and what may be and what will be meet and become one before the echo returns to its source. Whew. Finding the bull caribou in my scope, I squeezed the trigger.
Sweet. And that's how you use quotes to build your own work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's beautiful stuff.
Thank you.
And I didn't know that guy's work.
It's a great essay.
Yeah.
Would recommend reading that.
Yeah. And anything of Peterson's too.
Yes.
Lord, he was a seminal voice in elk hunting. Isn't there a book called Elk Heart?
Elk Heart. Yeah, it's a good one. And then oh gosh, is it Blood Sport or Blood? I
don't know the other one.
He has another really good collection of his own essays that are all related to hunting, and of course he's definitely he has strong opinions, which some might not agree with, but he certainly has a lot of passion and a great writer.
He's a powerful guy.
Yes.
And he was doing it before anybody else. He came of age in that. He's Vietnam age. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, and he was friends with Abby for a little bit there towards the end too. I think he edited some collections of Abby's letters and things like that.
Wow.
So interesting guy.
I have I had a question when you were talking about the Jeep rally in Moab.
Yeah.
I actually hit that this year.
Did you?
In April, I think.
Yeah.
And there was like 6 different languages being spoken at the gas station.
Yeah, it's quite the gathering.
And it was all these people though from these people were from countries where such a thing would be absolutely unheard of.
Right.
And I had I love that chapter because I had the same impression. I go, okay, you got to get a grip, buddy, because these people are enjoying the hell out of this. And they're from countries who long ago have lost any concept of public lands and public like access to go tear stuff up with a monster truck. Yeah. But are you familiar with Jim Stiles' stuff, the Canyon Zephyr?
I don't think I am.
Well, he is the one. You should read Jim Stiles. Look him up.
Okay.
Canyon Country Zephyr, I think he's a reporter in Moab. He's Edward Abbey years.
Okay. Yeah.
And he's like, the recreation industry is just as bad as the uranium industry. And he makes he's very smart.
Yeah.
So he makes a lot of sense. But you're finally for me, I'm like, no, it's not as bad as the uranium industry. That's my personal take. I'm not here to judge Jim Stiles because he's older than I am and he's been there in the trenches for forever. But Jim you should read his stuff.
I'll check that out.
Now, a lot of you guys are familiar with the old hunting tradition of eating, some organ, the heart or a chunk of liver off the first animal you kill. I had that when I was a little kid and it was a big deal. Organ meats were always prized by frontier people who knew the importance of getting a lot of different minerals and nutrients. And as often is the case, those guys were onto something because organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. And you can get the same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil made exclusively from regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished cattle. Heart and Soil's unique freeze-drying process means all those important nutrients are trapped in, ensuring you experience every one of the benefits of nature's superfood in a clean, convenient, taste-free capsule. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And make sure to use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase. That's heartandsoil.co. Use the code MeatEater. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land? Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild. But searching for property can be a maze. That's where Land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to Land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
Oh, but I definitely, to that point, I found myself over and over, and I felt this for years, and then I had to confront my own emotions and thoughts while trying to write this book, right? So I had to kind of confront my own biases and all of that, and as I can get so angry, so frustrated with these things I'm seeing out there, disheartened, pissed.
It can ruin your good time.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But then I have tried to get better at stepping outside of my way of looking at these things or my way of enjoying these things and think about where these other people are coming from or how they're engaging with the landscape. And would I rather them not at all? Not because if somebody wants to go out into a national forest with 18 kids and scream and hoot and holler and have a great time, maybe it kind of ruined my experience, what I thought I was going to get out of this. But if they're having a good time,
right,
and that leads to them appreciating these places someday, maybe they'll do something to keep them around.
Every one of those kids might become the ultimate advocate.
You never know.
Yeah, the guy or girl who fights it out.
Yeah. So I've constantly trying to remind myself that not everybody has to be just like me and how I enjoy these places. And there's a filter, though I try to pass it through. And I mentioned it here in the book somewhere. when you're thinking about how to balance all these different ways of using and enjoying our public lands and all the various stakeholders, it can be hard for me to sit here and say, no, this is the way it should be done. This is how I think it should be done, and I'm right. I'm coming from my own perspective, though. I'm coming from my own set of circumstances. I'm looking through my hunter's lens or whatever it might be. How do you balance that with all these different stakeholders, all these different ideas? And the one thing that I think is helpful that I took from the past, all this research, was taking the approach that Theodore Roosevelt always advocated for, which was always pass it through the lens of what's going to be best for the next generation and those to come.
Gotcha.
Look at this situation, look at this decision, look at this controversy, look at these opposing points of view, and think about what that might mean 20 years from now or 30 years from now. And if you can pass it through and it's going to keep this stuff around and keep it positive and viable, if we're going to make sure this is available for our children and their children's children, then that's probably right. It's kind of like Aldo Leopold's quote when you're talking about, if it tends to work with nature, it's probably right. If it tends to work against nature, it's probably wrong. Well, I would say the same thing with public lands. If it tends to be positive for future generations, then we're probably erring in the right direction.
Gotcha. And I think that one of the things I've got from Stephen Pine, the fire historian, was he said that the Forest Service itself needs to kind of redefine itself in the wake of being a fire suppression agency and all this stuff. He said, and to build towards perhaps an ecological resilience. And that word is everywhere now, resilience, but it's not that. It's just because it's used a lot don't mean it ain't great.
Right.
And to build those kind of ecosystem services, those ecological communities, which also work on a huge number of levels. You can still ride a mountain bike from it. You could still probably go monster trucking in part of it.
Sure.
And James Pogue, who wrote Chosen Country about the Bundys.
Yes. Yep.
He ends up in that book and in real life, of course, the book's nonfiction, but he gets to be friends with this guy who builds monster trucks. And they go banging around on monster trucks sometimes for 18 hours at a time. The guy's obsessed.
Wow.
And I talked to James about that, and I was just like, is that your thing? And he said, no, but it's his, and he's a friend of mine, and I got to see it.
Yeah.
And I can appreciate his way of pursuing this freedom.
Yeah.
It's a tight one.
Man, it's hard these days to do that because we're so surrounded. I mean, whether it be in the kind of digital social media world that so much of us are kind of sucked into now, it's said all the time now, but this echo chamber, it's really easy to get into our little zone, our little group of people, our little ecosystem, and never have to pull out of it and look at things from somebody else's perspective.
Right.
And that's so true when it comes to public lands.
Right.
So it almost takes like a proactive approach. So you have to constantly have a little self-talk with yourself, saying, hey, you know what? Take a step back.
Yeah.
Think about this from a different perspective. And I think that's a helpful thing. And I think it's probably the only way that we're going to be able to move this whole thing forward in a positive way. So we have to, whether it just be American politics in general or public lands.
Yeah. I agree
as
with
a
that.
people, we probably need to do a little more of that.
Yeah. And we don't live in a dictatorship. We don't live in a place where somebody can be so right and then impose their will on others. We've chosen not to do that.
Yeah. Very true.
Kind of uniquely in the world.
Right.
And so when you choose that path, that's a difficult path.
Mm-hmm.
And you got to embrace that difficulty. That thing you're talking about in writing this book and challenging your biases.
Yep.
That's a spiritual discipline I also can highly recommend to people who want to write or want to do podcasts or want to do anything like outside of, say, just roofing a house or fixing a car, right?
Yeah.
If you want to do something that is on a more abstract and larger level, that's the first thing you do is you challenge your biases.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be one of the most interesting spiritual disciplines in my experience.
Yeah. Well, anything that's in this book, anything where I have shared an idea or a suggestion or we need to do this or we need to think about this or this is something that we as a people are struggling with, whatever it is, every one of those things are simply things that I'm struggling with right now and working through right now.
Gotcha.
I mean, like this book is simply a communication of my internal battles and challenges and trying to figure this all out myself. And in many cases, I think there are things that are happening all across the country. We're all battling with these same questions and inner turmoil.
and it's there every day. I was listening to all that stuff on. I don't have a smartphone or anything. I was just listening to regular radio, and it's just like it's so boring too. The process and all, but in the NPR versus the Fox station versus all that stuff, and I have avoided that. Yeah. Not intentionally. It's not part of my life.
Yeah.
And I'm hoping to I want to be informed, but I don't want to be drowned.
Yes, that's the trick.
But one of the things it's in your work here, we have to know that when we are over across the table with people who disagree with us on one thing or another, that we and they are acting in some sort of good faith.
Yeah.
And that has not always been the case with the privatization of public lands movement.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we should understand that there are people who do not say what they mean and who will tell you falsehoods and who will couch their agenda in other things.
Yeah, and that's when the Ed Abbey approach has got to come out.
And that's when when righteous anger must be sustained and applied, right?
Yeah.
I was you have an incredible quote in there where during the pushback against Teddy Roosevelt's forest reserves and whatnot, one Western senator said,
God, I love
"We're filled with Google-eyed, bandy-legged dudes from the East and sad-eyed, absent-minded professors and bugologists." And that is the perfect. That's scorn, ridicule. Yeah. It's the last bastion of like somebody who's like furious and they're losing. And when I read that, I went and looked up Linda Beck, who was the carp researcher at Malheur, who was trying to they want to restore the red band trout.
Okay.
And the carp had muddied the water so much that they couldn't get any light through to foster the aquatic vegetation and the whole, whatever you call that, the food chain that would allow them to restore the red-bound trout. It also was messing up the irrigation and the agriculture and all this stuff, right? So she was the carp researcher, and this is what Ryan Bundy said. And there he said, yeah, this carp lady, this is part of what is destroying America. And Ryan didn't know any more about what was going on in that office, in that research, than I know about astrophysics.
Yeah, exactly.
And so one of the things on many sides, I willful and scornful ignorance, we can fight over process.
Yep.
If we can agree on goals, we can fight over method. But I wrote this when I was reading your book. But we cannot yield to ignorance or messianic religious beliefs that will take us all over a cliff.
Yeah,
that's where we have to draw a line.
Yeah, draw a line somewhere.
Yep.
It's figuring out. It's getting people engaged in the process enough that they can start discerning between those two.
That's right.
Is a challenge.
That's right.
But once you get in there and people are in the arena and understanding what's happening, then you can start having those. I mean, you have to plant a flag on the hill at some point.
Yep.
And you have to. We all have to choose the sword we want to die on.
Do you think if you explained what the carp lady did to Ryan Bundy that he would understand it?
No. Well,
maybe.
Maybe.
I wonder.
But I think there's sometimes there will be people or groups that simply don't care.
Right. Yes.
Because there are sometimes such strong ideological stances that aren't necessarily supported by rational evidence.
Right.
But are simply because that's this. I'm not saying a literal religion, but a figurative religion of ideas.
Yep.
That if you present anything different, they'll just look at it as rubbish because it doesn't fit that worldview.
Right.
Just damn the evidence.
Sure.
So that's a challenge to fight against.
That's why you do armed rebellions. I mean, armed attacks instead of unarmed attacks, because you're not there to learn about the research being done.
Well, and it's the same thing with like hunting. There's going to be some portion of the populace out there that's going to be vehemently anti-hunting no matter what. Right. And they're going to, no matter what conversation you would have with them or how you present it, they're never going to change their mind. They're never going to be willing to consider what we're doing or why we're doing or how we're doing it. So in some cases, it's like beating your head against the wall. There's no point sometimes with trying to convince that person. But there's always, or most often, there's a large middle ground who is open to new ideas or rational evidence.
Right.
And that's the audience I think we can speak to and work with, and where there's opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that's what one reason when I finished this book, there's a, I don't know if it's in yours, but it's just like what we're talking about here is hope.
Yeah,
and the idea that an informed citizenry will often, it'll be excruciatingly slow maybe, but will often make the right decisions.
Yeah.
And that's what we're working on. That's what you're doing in this adventure book.
Yeah. Yeah, you have to have hope. You have to have faith. I mean, I was just thinking about this the other day. Yvon Chouinard always says that the only cure for depression is action.
Action. Yeah.
And I think that's so true.
Yeah.
And so there's two ways you can go about it. You can look at this world of wounds, as Leopold called it, whether it be ecologically or with the attacks on public lands. And you can either look at it from the perspective of, gosh, this stuff keeps getting attacked, gets worse and worse. The sky's falling down around us, and you can throw your hands up and say, what can I do? And you can get depressed about it, or just turn off and stop paying attention. Or you can take the opposite approach, which is saying, yeah, there's a lot of things going on. I can't control it all, but I can do something, right? Yeah. All I can control is my actions and my decisions.
Right on.
And I'm going to choose to do every damn thing I can
right.
to be on the side of the good, on the side of the positive, on the side of the action. There's a line in here that I found from Theodore Roosevelt, and I'll misquote it, but he said something along the lines of Theodore Roosevelt always preferred the man that took 2 steps to the man that theorized about the 200th.
The 200th. Step. Yeah, I got that out of your book. Sure, I wrote that down, actually.
I thought that was great.
Yeah.
It's one thing to think about it, and it's one thing to theorize, but do something. Do one little thing.
Yeah.
And that will lead to another and another. But the best antidote is action.
Yeah. And to have a somewhat of a thick skin.
Need that too. Need some optimism, need some thick skin.
Yeah. One of the things I've been noticing I have a large group of folks that I keep in touch with. I mean, I've been blessed that way, you know. There's a feeling of that things are so broken that you can't do nothing about it. Oh, it's so corrupt. Right. But actually, the United States, we're falling a little bit, but it actually ranks fairly low on the International Corruption Index.
Right. It's all relative, I guess.
Yeah. And to say Democratic Republic of Congo or Mobutu Sese Seko and all.
Yes.
But even amongst the upper levels, we have a fairly good rating.
Yeah.
And so that excuse for apathy is not actually valid.
Yeah. It's funny. I certainly can't. Being relatively new to the arena myself, I'm only 32 years old. I don't want to claim to say that I know what I'm talking about and all these things like this, but trying to learn from those who came before you.
Yeah.
It seems to be the case that you have to keep trying. You have to try to stay positive.
Right.
At least that's the approach I'm certainly going to try over the next 32 years of my life.
Well, you've done an tremendous amount of information gathering, research, reading on people who actually took the first step and accomplished incredible stuff. I mean, there's several of these things in here of John F. Lacey, who's a personal hero of mine, even though I'm from Alabama and my family was on the Confederacy side, right? But John F. Lacey was from West Virginia. They pioneered Iowa. He joined the Army at age 20. He was captured at Blue Mills, the Battle of Blue Mills, and then paroled and went immediately back to the Army and then stayed in until the final blast. And then he's the one that wrote the Antiquities Act.
Yeah.
So sometimes, and I think I've said this on a podcast before, sometimes I see these lesser beings who have experienced no fire that we know of, trying to attack the creations and the accomplishments of John F. Lacey. And I just, it's very hard to hold on to your objectivity at that point.
Yeah, it can be, and I'm sure every decade from here on out, I got to believe I'm going to find myself having those kinds of moments more and more often, probably.
You can remember John F. Lacey.
Right.
And you go, what would he do? Like what's happened here? 8-term Republican senator from Iowa.
Yeah.
In public service his whole life, in 1902 joins the Boone and Crockett Club. I wrote all this down earlier because I just was like, it's in your book. There are, as we spoke earlier, and I know we got to get wrapping this up, but there are doors in this book. The great writers, great thinkers, and there is a clear portrait of how Americans have achieved fantastic things over and over.
Yeah, it's inspiring.
It's inspiring.
If anything, I came out of this whole project from all the reading, all the research, everything I try to dive into to just better place myself in the now. I came away with absolute optimism and inspiration and hope because they did it then. We can do it now.
Yeah.
They laid the blueprint for how to do it.
Yep.
They showed us it's possible.
Yep.
It's not going to be easy, as Randy always likes to say. It's not easy. It's not convenient.
Yep.
But it's worth it.
Yep. That's one of my favorite quotes of Randy's, and I think about this all the time. Is conservation is not convenient, and it's a choice.
Yep.
You know, and there's winners and losers in all of it, but in the end, what we were talking about was to maintain the integrity of something that we've inherited.
Yeah.
That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's a hell of a torch that was passed on to us.
It was.
It's a heavy burden.
You have that in the book, the responsibility element of it.
Yeah, I feel that a lot. Mm-hmm. We're so lucky to have what we have now, and I think it's important to remember that it is a responsibility now on our shoulders.
Yeah,
to keep that going. And then absolutely, after becoming a father, I felt that a whole lot more personally. And I've got a second one arriving in 2 months.
Yeah,
another son coming. And,
congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. And that just. It makes this unbelievably personal. It's not just about my own, what I'm going to be doing for the next 50, 60 years, but it's what's the world they're going to grow up in.
Right.
Kids have, and I'm only just learning this now, but they've got a way of really changing the timeline you think on and how you look at the world.
They do. It also, it explodes the concept that you're the most important thing on earth.
Yeah.
And in my experience, I tell people that raising these children with my wife, who was really good at it. I was a work in progress. It's been the largest adventure of my life.
Yeah,
and they're big now, but the adventure continues whether you want it to or not. Yeah. You know, and like in your book, you're talking about adventure is not really comfortable. It's like gallons of sweat and running out of water and falling and having the sewer plug come out of the out of the camper, right?
Yeah, there's be some bumps along the road. That's for sure.
But this is what I wanted to pass on, and you'll do it because you're deep in the arena with this. And it's a spiritual discipline to write this book. It's a spiritual discipline to be a father. And we've got my kids and I have, and my wife, my kids and I especially, they hunt with me. And this is something that it's an obligation. There's no way I could repay it.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to repay it, but I can try. Yeah. I can act.
It's all you can do is act.
Yeah. Do your best. I just have so I'll quit. What's next for you?
Well, doing a lot of cool things here with Meat Eater. Actually been working on a project here most recently called the Back 40, in which I'm looking at the flip side of all this, which is some of the issues related to private land conservation, which has been a really interesting thing to learn about. But I want to write more books too.
Yeah.
I think that's when I'm 75 and looking back, I hope I've written a bunch of books that can stand the test of time.
A body of work.
A body of work. I loved this process. This is of everything I've been blessed to be able to do. Nothing has been harder, but nothing has been more fulfilling.
Gotcha.
I'm more proud of this than anything else I've ever done.
Yeah.
So I would love to continue to explore these types of issues related to my love for the outdoors, wild animals, and wild places, and what we can do to keep them around and keep them healthy and sustainable. So I don't know exactly what those stories will be. I don't know exactly where they'll take place or where they'll take me. But that's what I want to do when I grow up.
Yeah.
Is share those stories and share those lessons, and hopefully leave a positive impact.
Well, I think you're in it.
Well, I appreciate you saying that.
But I'll be interested to say I'll read whatever you write. I mean, this is a hell of a freaking launch.
Well, I can't tell you how much that means because you've been an inspiration for me. I've read your work for so many years, and I've always looked at the things that you've put out there to the world. Like, man, he's got it. You're conveying, you're getting across this sometimes hard to digest information in a way that is emotional, in a way that fired me up, in a way that helped me take the next step.
Yeah.
You were one of those people that helped with this book too. So thank you, Hal.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's written like you all of that stuff was produced, and it was produced with beating your head against the desk, all of it. But it comes from that same well of like absolute passion. You're like, this is just too incredible.
Yeah. Yeah, just love these places.
Yeah.
Love what we're able to do. We're the luckiest people in the world as far as I'm concerned.
That's the way I feel too, man.
Yeah.
Well, Mark, I will, they could check out, people that want to get more can do the Wired to Hunt podcast.
Yep.
And are you running a blog still?
So now all of my articles live on the Meat Eater website.
Okay.
So that's all at themeateater.com, and the Wired Hunt podcast, and the book's available on Amazon and where books are available.
Right on. And then the book is That Wild Country, an epic journey through the past, present, and future of America's public lands. Thanks for doing it, man.
Hey, thank you, Hal.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
This has been fun.
Thank you.
You bet. This has been Backcountry Hunters and Anglers podcast and blast. I'm Hal Herring. We're signing off for this one, but we'll be back in a week or 10 days. And meantime, check out backcountryhunters.org. Get some more podcasts there and see what we're up to. And also, I'm going to be out there wandering around hunting and fishing, wearing out a pair of boots. And I hope you'll be doing the same thing. We're living in God's pocket. We need to celebrate that. Never forget it. And get out there and live it and enjoy it. Hey, thanks a lot, everybody. Talk soon.
And that's a wrap for me, too. Thank you all for listening to this unique version of the Wired Hunt podcast. And big thanks to Hal and Backcountry Hunters and Anglers for hosting me on their show, sharing with us with their audience. Hopefully they all enjoyed this as much as I did, and I hope you did, too. I will give you one more ask. If you haven't yet, would love it if you could pick up a copy of That Wild Country for yourself or a friend or a family member. I put my heart and soul into this. I hope you can see that and feel it and hear it as I talk about it and as you read the book. I hope you find it valuable, that you'll learn something from it, that you enjoy it, and that maybe it can give us all a little push to do a little bit more. I know that in writing this book, for myself, it gave me a huge kick in the butt to try to do a better job of walking the walk. It's not always easy or convenient, but as Randy Newberg has reminded me in the past, it is always worth it. So with that, my friends, I will let you go. I hope the beginning to 2020 has been a good one for you, and I hope it's a wonderful, wonderful year that you've got laid out ahead of you. So until next time, thank you for listening, and stay wired to hunt.
I'm sure a lot of you guys remember the old ceremonial hunting tradition of eating the heart out of the first animal you kill. Meat from those organs are among the most nutrient-rich foods on the planet. You can get those same benefits your ancestors craved via convenient daily capsules from Heart and Soil. Find out more at heartandsoil.co. And remember, use code MeatEater for 10% off your purchase.